St. James. She is a Waukesha County water conservation specialist who, I don't remember how we got connected.
I don't either, actually.
But she loaned this watershed model to us for the village when we did the MS4 permit watershed workshop this past spring. And so we get the expert to demonstrate it today. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for coming out. And yeah, I guess I'd forgotten that you've had this with this group, so maybe you are bored with this. But I always find this more interesting than sitting there looking at pictures. I have found that adults love toys as much as kids do. So let's have ourselves some fun. I am going to talk a little bit about water, stormwater, all of that good stuff. And so I brought the watershed model. Who can tell me what a watershed is? Ooh, I stumped it right off the bat. Anybody brave enough? Give it.
It's the area that the water will drain when there's rain.
Yeah, excellent. So it's just it's an area of land that drains to a particular water body. So watersheds can be big or small and anything in between. If you have a puddle in your backyard, you could actually designate the watershed around it. Where did the water in this puddle come from, right? But they can be on a big scale. Here in Elm Grove, you know, you're right here with Underwood Creek going outside the front. I probably pointed to the back of the building. I don't know, I get disoriented inside with no windows. But so you're in the Underwood Creek watershed, but the Underwood Creek watershed is bigger than that because it drains ultimately into Lake Michigan, so you are also part of the Lake Michigan watershed. So watersheds also nest inside of each other, right? So a small watershed that feeds into a bigger river is part of that watershed, which feeds into a bigger river and is part of that. So think of it kind of as nesting cups, that those watersheds kind of nest inside of each other. So watersheds, everybody lives in a watershed, all land everywhere. So there's no such thing as not being in a watershed. Even in the desert, it's just a very dry watershed, not a lot of water in those watersheds, but they are still watersheds. So all land everywhere is part of a watershed. And we've changed our watersheds a lot, and I think everybody knows that, right? We humans, we change things. We come in and fix them, make them better, and do all that. Well, up here, before we came and changed a watershed, you can see that only 4% of any rainfall would have been runoff. So the remaining water either soaks into the ground to get into the groundwater or is used up by the plants, right? Stays up shallow and gets picked up by the plants. Once we come in and we change our watersheds by adding all these impervious surfaces, so roads, rooftops, parking lots, driveways, patios, sidewalks, you get the picture, right? We add all of those impervious surfaces and all of a sudden our number jumps up to 35, and I've seen it 35 to 40%, kind of a given amount of runoff. And that's in an area such as Elm Grove. Most of Waukesha County would fall into that category. You get into Milwaukee where it's very dense and there's very little green space, you can actually have 70 to 80% runoff in an area like that. There's just nowhere for the water to soak in. So we drastically change our watersheds. At this point in time, 80% of the population of Wisconsin still drinks groundwater. So think about that. We go from 56% of a rainfall that soaks into the ground to get to the groundwater versus 35% that soaks into the ground to get into that groundwater. Now, I'm speaking to people who all drink Lake Michigan water here, right? But no, you guys have wells? All right, in Elm Grove. All right, I stand corrected. I'm not familiar enough with Elm Grove, but yeah. So you guys drink groundwater. So that water soaking into the ground is pretty important. We don't often think about that either. So we've created more runoff, and on the flip side of that, then we're getting less water soaking into the ground. So as that water runs off in our watershed, it picks up things. Water's powerful. It can move stuff, right? So it picks up things and carries it with it as it runs off. What sort of things do you think that rainfall will pick up and carry when it runs off?
Soil.
Soil. Come on up here. You're the next contestant.
Come on down.
Now everybody's gonna be afraid to answer next time. It's like either that or, yeah. If you could sprinkle some anywhere that is brown on the model.
Oh, well, I'm gonna be really obvious.
So we can get soil erosion from farm fields, from hillsides where there's not enough cover to hold the soil in place, construction sites, stream banks. If you have ever seen, especially in these little streams such as Underwood Creek, they're very prone to flash flooding. And so they scour out the banks and pull sediment from those banks. Thank you. Interesting thing, so she picked the farm field to put it on, right? Back in the early 90s, and yes, I've worked for Waukesha County that long, but I was actually there when this study was getting done. They did a study of the Upper Fox River watersheds. You guys don't live in that watershed, but it's not that far from here, right? So the Upper Fox River watershed contains Sussex, Pewaukee, the whole city of Waukesha, pretty much down to the south side of Waukesha. That is the Upper Fox River watershed. And they did, in this study, they were determining where is the sediment load in the Fox River, where is it coming from? And what they found in their study was that 60% of it came from construction sites. 60%. The 30%, the next biggest chunk, just came from urban runoff. Streets, gardens, yards, that sort of thing. That only leaves 10%, right? The remaining 10% was split between farm fields and stream bank erosion. Let that sink in for a minute. So we always hear, it's the farms, it's the farms, it's the farms. Well, if you got them, maybe. We don't have a lot of them around anymore in this county. So in this county, it's not, and certainly not in the eastern half of this county, it's not the farms.
Were the construction sites not controlling their runoff like they were supposed to?
Yeah, so think of that timeline, early 90s. These rules have not been passed. In Waukesha County, our construction site erosion control ordinance, I might be wrong, but I think it was passed in 91. And that's about the time the study was being done. So that kind of control is not out there yet. So that's a very good point, right? We still have a lot of construction, but we have more controls, more practices to try to keep, prevent that erosion from happening. So it would be fun to see a study again to know how much of a difference that made, right? So it's probably a bigger chunk now that's just urban runoff. Quite honestly, but I'm not going to say that construction sites are completely off the hook. So even though farms are bigger, acreage-wise, when you look at a tons per acre of soil loss, farm fields typically will erode around 5 tons per acre per year, compared to construction sites which can erode 15 to 20 tons per acre per year. So they're much smaller, but they erode at a much higher rate. When they get done, they're supposed to get everything stabilized, right? So it's a little window of time, but they can do a lot of damage in that little window. So definitely soil. What else is going to get picked up by water when it runs off? That's a great answer now.
Fertilizer?
Fertilizer. Come on up here. Let's get some fertilizer on the landscape. Pick a place to fertilize.
Definitely the farm.
All right.
Our yards get fertilized.
Is it getting clogged? Give it a good shake. All right.
Grass has to get fertilized. It's nice and green.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So yeah, fertilizer. I've got some more stunning statistics for you. So they've done studies, and I believe this one, in fact, I have a slide that tells whose statistic this is. I think it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Homeowners that use fertilizers and chemicals tend to use 10 times as many as farmers do on a per acre basis. I'm seeing those looks. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so if I'm going to fertilize my yard, what's my goal? My goal is to make sure that my yard looks better than my neighbor's yard. So as long as my yard looks at least as good as, or if not better, right? That's my goal. As long as my yard looks at least as good as my neighbor's or better, that's what I'm after. Most homeowners are not testing the soil before they apply. They're just putting the fertilizer out there. And sometimes it's not even needed. So we really have to get on that. But actually, I'm giving away all my slides later, so I need to just continue on. So yes, fertilizer. And couple the fact that 10 times as much fertilizer as farmers, let's couple that with the other statistic out of UW, I think it's out of UW Madison, they're in their ag department there. Turf grass is the 5th largest crop in the state. Behind corn, beans, hay. I don't know what number 4 is, but you know, you get your corn, your beans, your hay, wheat, sure, and then turf grass. Those are some big numbers. All right, so we've got fertilizer and soil. What else? Yep, and I'm just going to couple that with all the fertilizer. So any kind of pesticide, herbicide, insecticide, anything ending in "ide," killing something, fertilizers, all those different things, lawn chemicals. So I won't make you come up here for that, but I'm sure you can come up with something else.
Road salt?
Road salt, come on up here. Absolutely. The salt comes out really fast. So sprinkle some on a road here. Yep. Not to ruin your night, but that day's coming, isn't it? Right? Those salt trucks will be back out and the salt will be back on the streets. Thank you very much. Road salt's one of those things that I don't think that all the science is even there yet, so I don't think we can fully understand where we're headed to it. But I will tell you that in the state of New York, because you know they get snow there too, they have salted enough that they have some lakes that no longer turn over because they're too salty. And I don't know if you're familiar with lake turnover, but every spring and every fall, lakes will naturally turn over. The water that's at the bottom comes to the top, the water at the top goes to the bottom, and it's all got to do with warming, because that cold water sinks to the bottom. Well, in the winter, once this top part that was warm starts getting cold, it gets actually colder than the bottom, and the whole lake flips. But salt water is more dense than fresh water, and it sits on the bottom. And so there is a lake in New York that doesn't turn over anymore, that natural process. And that's one of the natural ways of getting nutrients cycled through that lake. And it doesn't do that anymore because of the amount of salt. Are we going to get to the point where we start to kill our freshwater organisms? How long will that take? I don't think we know the answers to those things. So that's just something to look out for. We've done a lot, though, to promote using less salt, and in fact, a lot of our streets, we think of streets as like, oh yeah, it's the highway departments, and it absolutely is, right? They use a lot of it, but a lot of those folks have gotten trained, and we're seeing them using less and less on our highways and streets. Where we're really seeing the huge amounts and the excessive amounts still getting used, and as soon as I say this, you're gonna go, oh yeah. Think about stores, sidewalks, and parking lots, right? They don't want to get sued for somebody falling, so the people that they hire to come in, they charge by the amount of salt that they use, and there's no incentive for them to use less because they're being paid to clear it so that they don't get sued by anybody for slipping and falling, right? So, you know, I can think of the crunch at several places I've been to, just massive amounts of salt. So things are in the works there. All right, salt. Yes.
John, are there any ordinances within the village regarding salting?
Not specifically, but
The village just has to comply with all of the county regulations that are there?
I don't know that there's a lot of regulations on it, honestly.
Don't they have to go to some training, the guys that run the trucks?
well, yeah, that's more of an internal thing.
Okay.
It's not like a state.
It's not.
Right. We are working, there's a group called Wisconsin Saltwise. You can check out their website. And I've been part of sort of a guiding committee on that Salt Awareness Week with Wisconsin Saltwise. We are working on getting legislation put through that, and this legislation would limit liability for stores and places so that they can, we can start to change that incentive to make it easier for them to think about using less salt, right? So limit the liability, but that bill would also create a structure for certification. Right now, there's nothing, but as I say that a lot of the municipalities have trained their plow drivers. They have, but they're not required to or anything. So this legislation would create a certification program. I'm not sure of all the ins and outs of the legislation. I don't know if everyone would have to be certified to be plowing, or if it's just recommended, things like that I don't know. But it's going to create a certification program as well.
So we switched to brining this past year, right?
No, it's been a few years. Yeah, we do brining prior to the storm.
And brining is a great way to cut down on salt. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people understand is that salt really doesn't become active until it's in water. So when you make up brine, which is salt dissolved in water, right, and you put the brine on, that salt is already activated and it's going to work immediately. So, and then you need a lot less. When you're using the chunks of road salt, you assume a bunch of them are bouncing, getting knocked off the road, you lose a lot of it. So there's a lot more that gets used that way, so you can use a lot less when you're using the brining. And it's also a practice that you call anti-icing. If you get that brine down first, it's preventing the snowpack from ever forming, and it's preventing that bond with the pavement. So now the plow can come in, remove it, and get it off easier. So brine has been very effective and a good thing. All right, what else?
Detritus, I don't know, like leaves and grass clippings and.
Yep. Come on up here. Yeah, you come on up here. She's nominating you. Take a pinch and sprinkle some detritus, some leaves and grass clippings. Put some down the street somewhere. I realize we don't have any trees on this model, but that's because when we spray the water, they all fall over, so I stopped putting them on. Thank you. So leaves and grass clippings, not pollution on land, right? In fact, very useful. Any of you compost your leaves? Okay, we've got some composters in here. So we know that they're really good to break down that organic matter and put it back into the soil is very good. But to break down that organic matter and put it into the water is not so good because it fuels a lot of the weed and algae growth. So those harmful algae blooms can be attributed especially to phosphorus. And there is a lot of phosphorus, particularly in leaves, more so than grass clippings. Grass clippings are high in nitrogen. But they've done studies within the last 10 years that came out of Madison where they could directly link the amount of phosphorus being delivered to the lakes to the amount of leaf cover on the streets up above. So there's a lot of phosphorus in leaves. And the leaves don't even have to wash into the lake to do the damage. Tea drinkers in here? Yeah? 2 ingredients? Leaves and water? Yeah? Guess what? So every time it rains, it's making a leaf tea. So I do these talks with kids, and first of all, when I asked for the 2 ingredients, I was told sugar and water. Okay. But then when you say it makes a leaf tea, oh, can we drink it? No. But it's the same thing, right? So it's pulling the nutrients out of the leaves and delivering the nutrients to the lake. The leaf doesn't have to go anywhere. It can stay on the street. But the phosphorus gets delivered and does the damage. So yeah, that organic matter on the streets is definitely a problem, and particularly in the fall, but there's stuff all year. All right, what else? Okay, so I've spent the morning out here at Underwood Creek, and I have never seen so many people out walking with their
Pets.
come on up here.
I did decent.
Yeah. Busy part, well used. It's a little clumpy, but take a little fingerful, pull the really big clump out. Take a little pinch,
She
just
just
reach
picked
in
that
and
up
take a
today.
pinch. And sprinkle some in somebody's yard or out there. You know, she didn't ask me if it was real. It's not. I'll bet you can tell what it is by the smell.
Coffee grounds.
Coffee grounds. I have kids that won't put their hand in the bag going, "Mm-mm." I'm like, it's coffee. Mm-mm. All right, so pet waste, definitely. So in Waukesha County, we have over 100,000 licensed dogs. It's about 140,000 is the last number I got from the humane officer.
Well,
There, that's good.
There's wild animals, deer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm going to pick on the pets, and I'm going to do it for a reason. So there are studies that tell us, thank you very much, there are studies that tell us that pet waste has 10 times as many bacteria in it as wild animal waste. They're not sure why. It's thought that it's probably got something to do with processed food that they eat, but it's a lot more bacteria. So yes, there's wild animal waste out there too. The two really big problematic sources in our urban areas would be geese and dogs. All right, so most other things, yes, they're out there, but not really so much a problem. But the geese and the dogs can be a problem. So think about that 140,000 dogs in Waukesha County. Now, granted, it's the whole county, and the county's big, right? But you figure those are mostly in those urban areas, right? Those numbers are condensed in those urban areas. There's some fun research out there, and it tells us that 1/3 of dog owners pick up after their pets all the time.
1/3.
1/3. Yes. All right, so there was the 140,000 dogs out there produce a half a pound of waste a day, so that's 70,000 pounds a day times 365 days a year, and 1/3 of it is picked up all the time. The next 1/3 will get picked up if you educate them why they need to do it. All right? So there's an education component, which is why I go out and do talks and try to teach people there's a reason you want to pick it up. We don't want it in our water, right? So that middle third will. Can you guess about the last third? Doesn't matter what you tell them, they're not going to pick it up. So I was telling somebody this. I was talking with a group of teachers during a summer training, and one of them said, "Oh, that's my dad. He walks the dog and he takes a paper bag and he puts pine cones in it so that people will think he's picked up after his dog." It's like he spends more energy trying to make people think he picks up than actually what he could do and just get the job done, right? So 1/3, at a minimum, 1/3 of that 70,000 pounds a day is left out there. That's still some pretty big numbers. So it's a problem. It's a source of nutrients again. So I know we think nutrients has a good connotation, but when we're talking about our water, it's those nutrients and the phosphorus in particular that's causing the weed and algae growth. So nutrients, excessive nutrients in the water are bad. Some nutrients are good, but excessive are bad, and that's what we're getting is excessive nutrients. And then it's the bacteria and other things too. Do you guys remember the cryptosporidium outbreak? Do you remember the news stories and where they told us it probably came from? They said it came from farmers' cows, right? Cows in the stream. I saw those stories. Cows in the stream, cows in the stream. Do you know that they were actually able to go back and genetically source it and figure out where it actually came from? And I'll bet none of you ever actually heard this story on the news.
Was it pigeons?
No. Yes, it was human source. So remember, and this goes way back before the deep tunnel, remember all the times that Milwaukee would have to release untreated sewage because of a big rainfall? And so some of that untreated sewage went out and got taken up in through the water intake, and that was the source of their cryptosporidium. It was not cows. So cryptosporidium lives in the gut of all animals, essentially. So, you know, pet waste, yes, there's cryptosporidium in that too. Now, of course, Milwaukee has upgraded their system, and that's no longer an issue for them. They will not have cryptosporidium again, but that was an eye-opening event. All right. Automobiles.
Oil.
Give anybody, who wants to come do oil? Do you want to come do oil? No? Do you want to do it? Put some sprinkles of oil down the road if you would, please. All right. So there's one number out there. I don't know, I can't remember who the numbers come from all the time, but it's estimated that there's more oil in our surface waters, rivers, lakes, and streams than gets dumped in the ocean every year from tanker spills. Because if you add up, drop at a time. Think about every parking lot you've ever been in after a rain. Do you not see rainbow puddles everywhere? That is oil floating on top of the water. So it's out there and it's everywhere. You can also think, this is kind of a fun thing too. Once it's in your head to think about it, next time you're on the interstate, take a look, and if you see a dark spot coming on the road, pay attention, because what happens right before that dark spot is you're going to feel a little bit of a divot or a bump in the road. And so what's happening? You're hitting that bump, and those people with the leaky cars, it's knocking that drop of oil off. That's why you get that dark spot, those dark spots in the highway. You'll feel it next time. So once I heard that, I'm like, I'm going to pay attention. When you pay attention, it's like, oh yeah, it happens. You can see it. So oil that drips out of our cars. And here's the one that no one ever thinks of. What if we watch this car on the driveway? Well, that's really loud, isn't it? Think about the detergent. Think about your car must be dirty. That's why you're washing it, right? So all the dirt and grime from your car, and it's going to go down the driveway, and it's going to find its way to the storm drain, the nearest storm drain. Now, do you guys all know where the storm drain goes? I see some nods, yes, but I see some people that are non-committal. So Waukesha County, I know where this number comes from. We've done surveys in the past, and we have found that 50% of people do not know where storm drains go. You get fun answers like, it just goes in the ground. It disappears. It's like, no idea. So where does it go? Who knows? Who can help out? I saw you smiling and nodding. Do you know?
Well, it depends where they are.
It depends where they are.
The closest regional
Yep.
water system, stream.
Yes, closest stream, river, lake, wetland. Yeah, so it's going to go to whatever water body is closest. All right, so Waukesha County has no combined sewers. They're all sewers that drain into some sort of, in some of the newer subdivisions, some of those storm drains will go to their stormwater detention pond, but those ponds still have outlets as well. So they're still connected to water. So storm drains deliver straight to our water bodies. I'm actually going to go look at a different slide now. So there's that storm drain connection. So as that water runs off, it carries all the things that we just talked about, and it jumps into whatever waterway is closest. Anybody recognize that lake on the bottom? No? Go south. I believe that's Little Muskego Lake. Yeah, right? So that's Little Muskego Lake after a big rain. And so the city streets are clean, right? And where does it all go? It goes into the lake. So it depends on where you're at. In Pewaukee, it'll either go into Pewaukee Lake or into Pewaukee River. In the city of Waukesha, Fox River. You know, you can sit there and travel around the county and think, oh yeah, Heartland, it goes into Bark River. It goes all these different places, right? So whatever water body is closest. There's no filtration, no cleaning. There's a lot of confusion out there because there is sanitary sewer and there is storm sewer. And I don't think everyone realizes those are two completely separate things. So we have separate storm sewer systems, separate from the sanitary sewer. And there's a lot of confusion for one because parts of Milwaukee have combined sewers. And that's why they did the deep tunnel, right? And how many news stories did we see about the deep tunnel and the combined sewers? And so everybody thinks, oh, and so now all that water is going to go to the sewage treatment plant. But it doesn't. That's in Milwaukee. And here in Waukesha, there are no combined sewers. So it's going straight into lakes and rivers. So two totally separate sets of pipes in the ground. All right, you guys ready for some fun? Let's make it rain. You guys want to come up? I do need volunteers. Let's make it rain. Come on up. I've got 2 water bottles and just keep coming, squirt a while until somebody else shows up and then hand them the bottle. Yeah, you have to find the bottle and get it going. It takes a little while to get everything wet and running.
It's fun in Elm Grove because there's not a lot of storm drains, so in the neighborhood, you can just walk around and follow the water around.
Oh.
That's one of my favorite things to do in the spring thaw.
Follow the water.
That's a,
Yep.
plug into someone's yard.
All right, why don't you guys pass those bottles? Anybody else want to come on?
Smells good.
It's kind of like fertilizer, which is too late. All right,
Yeah, I'm ready.
excellent, thank you. And then if anybody else wants to come up just to get a good look at what's going on right now, please feel free. Because from the back, for sure, you're not going to be able to see all of the stuff moving and running. Awesome. All right. Cool. Thank you. So you're standing right here. Can you describe this lake to everybody?
There's a, looks like a lot of gravel that's flowing in there. Some kind of colored water, was that sand?
That's mostly soil and oil, right?
Right.
But there's some fertilizer in there too. So yeah, it's pretty colorful, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, very brown. So not at all appealing.
No.
Yeah. Our manure piles out here, they haven't gone away, but you can see streaking away from them where the water's running and it's carrying particles. And that's why I use coffee, because it's kind of realistic. You know, it's not like the whole pile disappears at once, but slowly over time, that pile wears away, right? It's getting washed away, raindrop at a time. And so that's kind of the way that works. And kind of the same again with the leaves and the grass clippings and all of that stuff. It doesn't necessarily all go down the drain, but remember that leaf tea. So some of that stuff is still out there, but certainly our lake looks really bad. Now I've added, obviously fertilizer in your life does not turn funky colors like red, but so that you can see it move and watch it go. The Kool-Aid is good for that. So it really kind of helps to illustrate all of these things. So this is what we call runoff pollution. The official term is non-point source pollution. I hate that name because you ask anybody, what is non-point source pollution? It's like, well, what is a non-point, right? It just means it's not pollution that comes from a specific point. It comes from all over. So a point source would be a factory with a specific outlet pipe, right? So that's a point source. You can point at it. So everything else they call non-point. Okay, runoff pollution. That makes a lot more sense. A little more intuitive. So this is runoff pollution. So a long time ago, most of our pollution did come from point sources, but you can think back to events like the Cuyahoga River catching fire. That was instrumental in getting things changed. And actually, it caught fire more than once. But it was that last one that was really big that got all the media attention. But it caught fire, I believe that was the third time. Burned for more than 3 days. Historic accounts had the flames 3 stories tall. That's a lot of pollution in a river. right? So it was things like that that brought about the Clean Water Act in 1972. So we just celebrated 50 years of the Clean Water Act last year. And what that did was it said that these point sources, you cannot just dump your waste into our water anymore. And it set standards for clean water, and so they had to meet those standards now with what they were putting into our rivers and streams. Made a huge difference. We started to see a lot of turnaround right away. So now, most of our pollution is not from those point sources. Now, most of the pollution comes from this runoff pollution. It's kind of a harder problem because it comes from everywhere as opposed to just being able to put rules and say, you know, the problem's coming from you, and you, and here's how you fix it, and go and do. Now, instead, it's coming from everywhere. So in a way, it makes it harder because there's a lot more people we have to teach about it. But in a way, it kind of makes it easier too, because the fixes are kind of simple. When you think about what's out there, some of the fixes are simple. Obviously, not all of them. So, you know, when you're talking about stormwater detention ponds and things like that, and erosion control on construction sites, those are a little more complex. But when you think about your own house and you take it down to that level, then it's, oh yes, I can do that. And so there's simple solutions to do at home. And so we're going to talk through a few of those. Now, the slides that I have up here, and I'm going to be skipping a whole bunch of them because this is actually a different presentation. But I really, it's a new one that got put together, and some of them are very applicable. So I'm literally going to be flying past some of them. So Doug Tallamy, she mentioned the books over here. I really like this quote of his. In the past, we asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. Yes, and so our gardens can do that. We can ask our gardens to help manage our water. And so that is something we can look at. And we can start by planting native plants. Native plants have fabulous root systems. And because they're native, they don't need fertilizer, they rarely need water. They're pretty self-sufficient because they've been growing in this area for a long time. And they're quite beautiful. In fact, I noticed when I walked in, there are some native plants around this building, so I thought that was pretty fabulous. So native plants can manage stormwater. They've got great roots, so they can do that. We go through a whole lot of benefits here, and I'm going to jump to this one because here we have it. Develop deeper root systems that reduce erosion and runoff. Oh yeah, that's what we're after. Require less water, fertilizer, and pesticides. So that's all the things that I just said, right? So native plants will do that. They're environmentally friendly. So lots of benefits. They also help pollinators, birds, lots of other things, but our focus tonight is on the water. So I skipped all of those, and then we go into pollinators, so I am going to skip through all of this. I'm sorry if you're trying to read it, and I'm flashing right past. So leaves, I'm just going to briefly touch on this. Leaving the leaves in your yard is great, not in the street, right? So we've got to get those leaves out of the street, but we can leave them in our yards. One of the things that you can do with leaves in the fall is actually mow over them. If they're not too thick, if they're too thick, you will have to get them up because they will smother your lawn. But if they aren't so thick, you can just mow them right into the lawn, because remember all that phosphorus that they were putting into the water if they're in the street? They can put that into your lawn. That's okay. So you can mow them up right there, and then you can leave some in areas that are not grass just to be cover for all of those little native critters, the different bees and insects that we have. Our soil is very important when you think about what you do in your yard, right? And how many of you hate your soil in your yard? I hear that a lot. There's one. It's too much clay, right? That's what I hear in general. Oh, it's clay. It's really hard to work with. So with our soils, this is called a textural triangle. Anybody ever seen that before? Oh, awesome, I'm excited, some people have seen it. So sand, silt, and clay are the three main particle sizes that make up soil. And so you can look at the triangle to see where your soil falls in that. Is it mostly sandy, mostly clay, mostly silt? Or is it somewhere in the middle? Those are loams, those soils. Your soil's gonna make a big difference as far as what you can grow, how you can grow it. So, and obviously people, when they're adding fertilizer, they think their soil doesn't have enough nutrients. So the soil will make a big difference to that too. One of the things that you can do to improve your soil is to add compost to it. Organic matter, and I'm gonna hit on this again later in this, that organic matter does really wonderful things for soil. It helps it manage that water, okay? So very, very good is to increase. Most soils only have around 3 to 4% organic matter. If we can increase that by 1% or 2, it's gonna make a huge difference. Tilling is bad. Make sure you work your soil when it's not too wet. All of those good things. So when we think about all the fertilizers and things that we're putting on our lawn, we need to kind of think about our lawn. What do we expect from it? Do we want it completely weed-free? Does it have to be completely weed-free? Can we tolerate a few dandelions? How about clover? How many of you have clover in your yard? Oh, look at all those hands. All right. So it was standard practice back in the 40s and 50s that when a new lawn was going in, they always seeded it with grass and clover. Does anybody know why?
Clover traps nitrogen.
Yes. Clover fixes, it's a legume, and anything in the legume family is going to fix nitrogen. So it actually puts nitrogen, instead of taking nitrogen out of the soil, it puts nitrogen in. And grass needs nitrogen, right? So you plant the clover, you plant the grass, guess who's feeding the grass? The clover. Well, the chemical companies decided after the war that they could make a lot more money if they could sell weed killers and get rid of all that clover. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, now that the clover's not there, now we can sell fertilizer. And so they changed everybody's perception of a lawn that clover was bad, but clover really isn't bad. It does wonderful things for your lawn. And when all the grass dries up, that clover is still green. So during the drought, I know the clover in my yard stayed green. So it's kind of nice. So leaving clover is a great idea. Anybody water their lawn? It was a dry summer. I've got a few nodding yes. Yeah. I'm not going to say you shouldn't. You don't have to. I'll say that. You don't have to. Your lawn can go dormant, and for the most part, it won't kill it. I did say for the most part, because occasionally, if it's a really long, bad drought, the grass could potentially dry up. So people at Extension will say, well, it's probably better for your grass to not let it go dormant. That's just a decision to make. But here's the one thing that I will say about lawn watering. Most people don't do it right. Okay, so if you're going to water the grass, you need to water either early in the morning or late at night, because otherwise most of that water is evaporating. And then you need to make sure that you're using the right amount, 1 inch a week. I know I've got neighbors that ran the sprinkler all night long. I can guarantee they can put on way more than 1 inch. That's just wasteful. So 1 inch a week is all you need, and the best way to know if you're putting the right amount out there is to do something to measure it. So if you've got a cup or a rain gauge or something that you can put where it's going to land on the sprinkler, then you know you're adding the right amount. And it's better to just do that once a week. So if you get any natural rainfall, you can subtract that out. So I know the other day I had 3/10 of an inch. So if I was going to water, I only need to add 7/10 of an inch now, right? Because 1 inch a week. Water once and water deep. That'll give you deep roots, which will give you better root systems, which will give you a better lawn. I think I did, yeah, there we go, mowing. And yeah, I know I mentioned the grass clippings here. We don't want the grass clippings to get into the water, but there are things that we can do to have a healthier lawn so that we don't need as much fertilizer, we don't need the chemicals, right? And then the way we mow actually can make a difference. So one thing to keep in mind is that you should never remove more than 1/3 of the blade of grass at a time. So that actually means mowing perhaps a little more frequently. But what you're doing and leaving that grass a little longer, you're leaving the grass a little longer to shade out the weed seeds, so the weed seeds can't grow as well. But it also doesn't stress your grass. So stressed grass is going to be more susceptible to pests, to weeds, to other problems. So keeping your grass from being stressed by not removing too much is one way to do that. Make sure your blades are sharp. And if you leave all the grass clippings on your lawn, that is the equivalent over a summer, that is the equivalent to a whole dose of fertilizer. So it used to be that they recommended 4 fertilizations a year. If you actually do that, you can leave one out if you leave your grass clippings on, because that accounts for one. But you don't really need to fertilize that much. And here we go, fertilization. The first thing, if you're going to fertilize, the first thing you should absolutely do is test your soil. Do you even need it? So farmers test their soil. So remember that farmers and homeowners, that 10 times as many by homeowners. Well, farmers are trying to make a living, right? So they're not going to spend money on fertilizer that they don't need. So they are actually paying for soil tests, making sure that they're applying the proper amount. Most homeowners aren't going to do that because, once again, we're not trying to make a living. We're not trying to make money doing this. We just want our yard to look good. So we're going to fertilize anyway. So your fertilizer it has the NPK. Those are the big macronutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I'm just going to come out and say this. Don't fertilize in the spring. The grass is growing like crazy in the spring. And when you add fertilizer, it's just going to grow more. And when it grows more, you're going to mow more, right? So that seems kind of pointless. I would say if you're going to fertilize, you probably only need to do it once. And you need to do it late in the year. So the best window for fertilization is coming up very soon. So around October 1st, it says, should be the last time or the latest. So late September up to October 1st, that's when you want to get that fertilizer on, because what you're doing then is that you're encouraging root growth, because your days are getting shorter, the days are getting cooler, the nights are colder, the grass isn't going to be growing as much. You're encouraging root growth instead of top growth. In the spring, all we're doing is getting top growth, and that's what the fertilizer is going to do for you. It's going to make you mow more. So that fall fertilizer is the best time to do it. All right, so, and it does say that winterizer is mostly potassium, which we don't need in Wisconsin. We have plenty in our soils anyway. So let's move on. Top dress with compost. I said I would come back with compost. Compost is wonderful stuff, and I bet most of you all said you had compost bins pretty much. You probably use your compost on your garden, right? Has anybody here ever put it on their lawn? You got one? We don't think of it. Put it on the lawn? Really? It's awesome for your lawn. And you don't have to work it in. In fact, I would say don't work in your compost. Just lay it on the top. And as it rains, it's going to help work that organic matter down into the soil. And the organic matter coats the soil, they're called PEDs, and it helps the soil hold its structure, and it creates pathways for the water to get down between the pieces, the PEDs of soil, creates avenues for water to get in. That 1/4-inch top dressing on a 1-acre lawn will help that lawn retain 16,000 gallons of water. That's a lot of water. And that's less watering you have to do on your lawn, right? Because your soil's holding more. It's going to feed your lawn, keep it greener. It's going to do all those good things. So increases your water holding. I don't need to read you. You guys can all read. So it does a lot of really good things for you when you add that compost. The one thing I will say about this too is that it looks like they put a lawn spreader on. A lawn spreader is not going to work to spread compost. You are probably going to have to do it by hand because it's too heavy and thick to go through a lawn spreader. So I don't know how they got this picture, but I did find it, and I'm like, okay, it gets the point across. Make sure you clean up when you're finished, right? So once again, the keeping the leaves, the grass clippings, anything, if you've spread fertilizer, make sure it hasn't bounced and gone onto the pavement, because anything on the pavement is gonna go, and it's gonna go down a storm drain and end up in water somewhere. So keeping everything as clean as you can and cleaning with a broom instead of the hose. When I was a kid, I love to tell on myself. When I was a kid, didn't know any better, but my mom would, every spring and every fall, we cleaned out the garage and we got the hose, and it was so fun to hose out the garage and push out all the gunk and watch it go flowing away. And now that I do have this job, I'm like, oh, what did I do? Oh my gosh. So cleaning with a broom outside is always better than cleaning with water, because where is your water going? And it's just trying to change that mindset. And it's kind of hard, because that's not the way we're all wired. We weren't raised that way. Just like I said, you know, when I was little, we were hosing things down to clean it. But there are better ways for our water to do it. All right. Rain
I guess-
gardens. Yeah.
Is it quite, like, so most of Elm Grove has ditches in front of homes.
Yes.
And so we don't, so are we a little bit more protected from that? Because, you know, if there's grass clippings on the street, let's say, it's gonna go into the culvert. Hopefully it gets caught along the way before it gets to the
Right.
watershed.
So ditches do the same thing as a storm drain, but they're above ground, so they're still delivering water, but they are a cleaner, better system, because, yes, things can get caught, they don't necessarily all travel, some will yet, but they're a cleaner system. Some of that water can soak in, nothing can soak in inside of a pipe, right? So it is a cleaner system, for sure, but it still is a delivery system, so keep that in mind. It still delivers. Rain gardens, anybody here have one? Yeah, okay, awesome, I have one. Rain gardens are a really beautiful, fun solution in your yard. It's essentially, it's just a sunken garden that you put in, where you're gonna send your roof runoff or your driveway runoff, if you have the ability to funnel driveway water in, but it will, you put your runoff, what would be runoff, into this sunken garden, and it holds it, gives it time to soak into the ground. So remember that hydrology, the very first slide, 4% runoff to 35. We're gonna try to shift things back. We're trying to get more water into the ground, less runoff, and that's what a rain garden will do for you. So it's a sunken garden planted with native plants, because native plants are good at managing stormwater. They've got the roots. So it captures that runoff. So I have an entire class on rain gardens. I could talk about them for a whole other hour. No one wants to sit here that long, so enough said. But rain gardens are one thing you can do. And I did see here that there is a rain garden that they send a lot of the parking lot water to. And I was pretty excited when I saw that. And it's beautiful, right? So they're very practical, very functional. The one thing I will say about them is that they should not hold water more than 3 to 5 days. If they're holding water longer than that, they probably haven't been sited or sized properly. So they will not breed mosquitoes, because the mosquito life cycle needs water longer than that. So if your rain garden's holding water too long, probably needs a rework. And I'll leave it at that. Rain barrels you can also use to help capture some of that runoff, that roof runoff, store it and use it for later. Just know that at 50 gallons is what most of them will hold. You're not going to capture all of your roof runoff. So if I had $1 for every time somebody said, oh yeah, I'm getting a rain barrel and I'm going to catch all my runoff, and it's like, no, you're going to catch a little tiny bit of your runoff. So in my rain garden program, I also talk about rain barrels, and I've got one slide that works you through the math, but let's just say on a 500 square foot roof, which is not a huge roof, 500 square feet, it takes 16/100ths of an inch of rain to fill that barrel. So everything else is still runoff. Enough said. So that car that we washed on the driveway over here, we can do other things, right? We can wash it on the lawn. Now it's all going to soak in instead of be runoff. Or we can go to the car wash. The car wash will be connected to the sewage treatment plant. That water gets treated, filtered, and cleaned. So a couple of good options for the lawn. And you knew I had to do this, right? So pet waste. There's the numbers. It's all in there. clean up after the pet if you've got one, right? So I've had so many kids tell me, well, the dog just goes in the backyard and it doesn't go in the pile, doesn't go anywhere. It's like, well, the pile doesn't move. It's the water that moves. Is the water that touches the dog pile clean or dirty? And then you get this look of horror on their faces. Oh my God, now you're getting it. All right. And finally, compost. A lot of you guys said you do that, right? So this is a great way to reduce waste, to put all those grass clippings and leaves and everything to work for you. Add your kitchen scraps, because actually 30 to 40% of the garbage in this country is actually food waste. That's a pretty big number too. So we can reduce waste, turn it into compost, add it to our soils, and make our soils much more efficient at holding the water and doing all of those good things. All right. Yeah, so there's all our sources, so I didn't make it up. Flip through it pretty quick. And there we go. Let's make sure I covered everything. We talked about, yeah, pet waste, soils. Yeah, any questions? Okay, yeah.
Instead of using rock salt on your driveway or steps in the winter when you get ice, would you recommend urea? Are you familiar with that?
You know, the bottom line is there's no such thing as a perfect product. There's not a silver lining on this one. You know, people ask about the beet juice and all the other things. There's a downside to all of them. So the beet juice is organic matter, and the organic matter fuels weed and algae growth, and you can just go through the list. There's a problem with all of them. So if you want to use urea, I'm not going to say that it's a bad thing. It would work. Just
Would you
know.
say it's better than rock salt or the other?
I would say it's not going to have the chlorides, right? Yeah. So it's going to be different. Yeah.
What is it?
Well, you could add. I was looking at a recipe, shall we call it, where you can use ash and soak the ash. Where do you get?
You can buy
purchase?
bags of it. It's like pellets. They use it at the airport because they don't want the corrosion on the aircraft.
Yeah.
And it melts ice, but it doesn't have chloride. So
Right. Yeah.
It's nitrogen.
Urea, like, in urine?
No,
Oh.
it's a, it's,
I was thinking.
it's a form of nitrogen,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I mean, that's a nutrient as well.
It is a nutrient. That's why I say no matter what product you use, there will be a downside to it. So just know that. It won't have the chlorides. So it's got that in its favor.
And if you have blacktop, it doesn't pull the blacktop off like salt.
Yeah. The bottom line on all of it is use everything with as little as you can to do the job, right? So once again, with the salt, you can think about crunching down the sidewalk, and that's just way too much. Saltwise has some graphics that show you that if you're using the salt, they should be about 3 inches apart. Now think about how many sidewalks you've been on where the salt is actually spread that thin. Not very many. So for the most part, we tend to overuse those things. The other thing I will just throw out there real quick is when things say pet friendly, there is no truth in labeling on these salt bags. So just know it's that if it's still a chloride product, it's still not necessarily safe for your pets. They can say that because there's no law against it, but it's not necessarily true. So, any other questions? Okay, you guys seem like you were a pretty educated crowd. Did anybody actually learn anything and pick up any new tips?
Yes, definitely.
All right, cool. All right, good. I'm glad. Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. I appreciate it, and thanks for coming up and participating with me because I'd have been lonely up here by myself. So, thank you.